Hello everyone, this is Noor Mousa.
And this is Rachel Sider.
Welcome to Confused About Yemen.
Confused About Yemen is a 3-episode podcast talking about one aid worker's experience living and working in Yemen and the people that she encounters along the way.
Maybe you remember me from Confused Iraqi podcast. In this podcast season, I am joined by Rachel to talk about Yemen.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel, and I'm a fellow aid worker who has lived and worked across the Middle East. So we're discussing Yemen today because this is a country that's come in and out of the news in recent months, given events that have been playing out across the Middle East region. And it's important to understand Yemen on its own and also in the context of some of these wider developments. We know that Yemen is one of the most difficult countries to access in the world for tourists and for other visitors, and that Noor had a real opportunity to live and work there herself. Noor, you want to tell us a little bit about why we're talking about Yemen today and what your experience was like?
Yes, for sure. I think it's really important to talk about Yemen. I feel very privileged to have experienced Yemen for myself, part of Yemen for a year. And I also feel responsible to share what I've learned about Yemenis and the stories of the Yemenis I met with the rest of the world, because unfortunately not everybody can go to Yemen because of the conflict and sadly the situation in there. So I just felt like it would be great and hopefully helpful for those who want to learn more about Yemen and engage with Yemen through at least a podcast.
Yeah, and we've both had, I think, the opportunity to also work on Yemen from the point of view of aid workers who have advocated for alleviating and addressing some of the humanitarian impacts of the ongoing conflict and its effects on the civilian population. And we'll both be coming at this issue from that point of view of having worked on the ground, having conducted research, and also having lobbied and challenged governments who are directly or indirectly involved in the response to do better and to deliver better aid responses and ensure the rights of the Yemenis are respected and upheld despite all that's going on.
No, exactly. And exactly us being aid workers and both of us doing humanitarian advocacy, it felt like a podcast would be a platform not to only share stories, but also to bring awareness and attention to the humanitarian crisis and the humanitarian side of what is happening in Yemen. And not only for Yemenis, but also for the African migrants who pass through Yemen. As we know, Yemen is a country in a crisis, but there is a crisis within that crisis.
So what should our listeners expect from us over the next couple of episodes?
I would say they should expect everything. They should expect us to talk about the human experience of Yemen, its culture, the gender dynamic, the food, everything about being in Yemen for a year, and understand also the significance of Yemen as a country, its links to the world and the wider region. So it's an opportunity to learn more about the country, to explore it a bit more.
All right, so where do we start? Yemen was once known as Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia, and that it was really famed for its fertile lands historically, its incense trade being situated on a global trade route, given its positioning in the southern Horn of Africa region, and also its skilled architecture. Some of you may have seen how its capital, Sana'a, is one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, right? And it's known visually, I think, to many of us as having these really distinctive mud brick tower houses that go back over 2,500 years and are really a World Heritage treasure that we hope can continue to be preserved. And we also know that Yemen is a country whose current conflict that's been waged for over 13 years now really traces back to some of the divisions that were formed prior to its 1990 unification and the integration of the northern part of the country with the south, both reflecting very distinct economic and political systems that came together after years of association or colonization with the Brits on one side and the Ottomans on the other. And a lot of these long-standing political and tribal divides really resurfaced after 2014. When the Houthi-held north really started to I think take prominence vis-a-vis the government-controlled South, and those two poles of the conflict still being very present in the lives of Yemenis today, affecting things from freedom of movement across the country to how goods and services can be accessed. Yeah, so maybe now, Noor, we can turn to you and just hear a little bit about how you first discovered Yemen. What were your early impressions growing up in Iraq?
Yeah, I think me, like many Iraqis, Arab children, and also maybe children of the world, we've learned about Yemen in school through our parents, not so much in the news, specifically for our generation. In my experience in the school, always we're told that it's happy land, Yemen, Aida is like, okay, I was thinking why it's so happy. But we were told that it's green, the people are simple and very friendly, music is good there, poetry. So that's what I knew about Yemen. But with time, Yemen started to be on the news for its conflict. It was really getting dark so quickly in Yemen. As an Iraqi, I grew up during a war, and things started to calm down a bit with time. But then when the conflict started in Yemen, it was taking over the media. And we started seeing the images of children, starving children, and women trying to feed their kids. And from my point of view, I really didn't understand what was happening. Even when you watch the news, is that when it reached that level of starvation, you start to wonder, what is the human experience? What is happening there? And with time, many Yemenis came actually to Iraq, and many Iraqis who were in Yemen were as teachers, came back to Iraq after 2003, but many also came back after the conflict has erupted in Yemen, and they started to talk about Yemen and like how much they love the food there. Everybody talks about Yemeni food, and then about the country, how unfortunate what is happening there, how much they loved being there. So I started to hear about Yemenis in Yemen, not only from the news, but from Iraqis who's been there or Yemenis who moved here. And then I started to develop this interest in the country, but also into helping the people there. After witnessing what happened in Iraq and being in the front lines in Mosul response, I really wanted to go and help in Yemen. And fortunately, one of the applications worked out, and I managed to get a job and get a visa and go to Aden.
That's really interesting to hear, I think, too, because my first introduction to Yemen was also through its food, living in Amman, Jordan, and going out to a couple of really well-known Yemeni restaurants and discovering just how vibrant the cuisine is and how different it is to anywhere else in the region where I've had the privilege of living. And then I think it also speaks to what you're saying around how a lot of those of us who come from maybe the United States or elsewhere first encountered Yemen as a country in conflict, right? And it's worth just maybe taking a moment to understand some of the roots of that conflict and how it's really impacted civilians. A lot of this does trace back to the 1990s when Yemen was still two countries, North Yemen and South Yemen, a socialist state that was really backed by the Soviet Union. And even after some of its unification, some of the political, tribal, and economic tensions persisted. But really today, what we're seeing, of course, is something that also has its roots in the Arab Spring and the 2011 uprising, when we saw some mass protests across the region, but certainly in Yemen, calling for the end of what was then Saleh's 33-year-long rule. And it was when he agreed to step down in 2012 and transfer power that we saw a really messy transition that led to some advancements by the Houthis um, in 2014 to really seize control over the north of the country and wield increasing influence politically, right? And we've also, of course, seen in this time the intervention and the involvement of several regional and even global powers in supporting the two sides of this conflict, both through the transfer of arms, but also through other forms of support that have um, really tried to wield bigger influence and have really changed, I think, the trajectory of the conflict. And one could argue even affect its ability to be resolved, right? But I think what really matters in this moment, perhaps good to hear from you on this, Noor, is is what this has meant for Yemenis. What has the impact of such a protracted conflict meant on everyday life, and what are some of the biggest humanitarian consequences?
Yeah, Yemen continue to be a very significant humanitarian crisis that impacting millions of people, not only Yemenis, as we said earlier, but then also immigrants from the Horn of Africa. It's impacted Yemenis, like I think as any conflict, it impacts civilians significantly. It impacts their access to basic services, to shelter, their sense of safety. They experience so much loss of not only family members, but then also properties. So it is very significant. Sorry, and we can see that impact also on the economy. So Yemen economy has never managed to recover. It continued to struggle. There's large rates of unemployment. The sectors are extremely challenged. There is very little exportation. Even importation is being challenged by regional politics and then the ability of the Yemen authorities in different parts of the country to operate their own ports. So that is impacting what Yemenis get from the rest of the world and what do they get to share with the rest of the world. And that reliance on aid is one of the biggest challenges in Yemen because aid depends on funding. And when there is lack of funding and increase in humanitarian needs in the world, that definitely also impacts Yemenis. And then services, electricity, that sector struggles a lot in Yemen. Very little investment in recovery and development projects. So people continue to be struggling with access to health, proper health services, access to education, employment opportunities, as I said, but then also even to create your own livelihood is very challenging because these basics import export power is not there. So it's really very difficult for Yemenis to be able to find way to make a living. And so we see many people in Yemen relies on family members outside of the country, Saudi Arabia, different part of the world, working and sending money to Yemen. One of the interesting things I've noticed in Yemen is that despite the country being low on infrastructure, you see so many exchange shops, exchange and hawala money transfer shops, because that's where people get the resources from. And then also it's so interesting that because of these dynamics and because of these challenges and the limitations on making a living, you see many people, they find themselves having to take interest in livelihood opportunities that are illegal and harmful to others. So for example, you hear of stories of fishermen struggling to fish and and for protecting their own safety, you see them making the decision to smuggle to transfer to the smuggling and the smuggling of alcohol, of different goods, of weapons, of carts, but then also of humans. That human trafficking is a big trade in Yemen. So that's also something that is very difficult to link to the war. However, the increase of number of people participating in this sector can somehow be a consequence of the struggling economy of Yemen and the lack of alternatives and solutions to this crisis. So yeah, I would say the economy, it's barely there and it's mainly reliant of family members outside the country. And that's very sad because Yemen has access to the sea, has agriculture, has gas, and it's just so unfortunate to see that happening there.
And I think if we bring this back to both of our experiences as aid workers, I think some of this is really evident in both people's access to food and the highest levels of acute food insecurity that we've seen compared to many other conflicts globally. As many as 17 million people in the country struggling to access food, and children facing acute malnutrition. And this is, of course, linked to many of the dynamics that you've mentioned. And it's equally as evident, right, in the healthcare sector, where there's been just a tremendous collapse in both the facilities and the infrastructure that's available to deliver basic and essential healthcare, either being destroyed or made inaccessible due to the conflict, but also the impact that this has then on non-communicable diseases, the spread of cholera and other crucial outbreaks, and then the challenges that maternal and child health care then faces. And I bring this up also because all of this is putting increasing demand on humanitarian aid workers who are really struggling to deliver in already very complex environment. And I'd be curious to hear a bit about what it was like to be part of an aid response where the demand for assistance was so high, but also the context was extremely challenging at times, and the politics of delivering in that environment really strained.
It is very challenging for the reasons you just touched upon. It's a very politicized crisis. It's not only a humanitarian crisis, it's a consequence of political disagreements. And unfortunately, that impacts the humanitarian resources that we have to support Yemeni people. Also, the other part of it is the capacity of local actors to support, cover these needs. It's very limited because of the economic situation in the country and the limitations on the export import of Yemeni goods. The other side of it is also because of Yemen divide between different governing bodies, like you have 3, 4 different governing bodies, coordination of the response is very challenging. You have different hubs, different authorities to coordinate with, different demands. So how do you satisfy everyone? How do you reach everyone when it's that challenging to sit and talk to people and trying to explain to them that on the other side, maybe there's something more urgent. So the coordination part of it is really challenging. Access is really challenging in Yemen. When I worked in Yemen, there were multiple issues related to approvals, related to gender challenges for Yemeni female staff within the aid sector to be able to travel and provide assistance by themselves through. But that was very challenged in the north because of the Mehrim policy. We are not sure what to call it, if it's a policy or not, because it's something that is more cultural, but it's being demanded. So that was a big challenge and continue to be a challenge. Then access on the road because of safety of the road, the closure of the roads in Yemen. It was so interesting that during the day you see Yemenis mainly monitoring news about roads opening so they can plan their trips and see when they can visit their loved ones. So landmines is a challenge for aid workers in order to assist people, especially that in Yemen they do have seasonal rains. Then that train gets to transfer mines, and that's also another layer of risk, being not only able to identify locations of mines, but to track them and trace them through this. So there's these physical and access barriers, the coordination barriers. It's very challenging to be in Yemen also because unfortunately the aid response has been in the country for a very long time, that there are some perceptions, false perceptions, negative perceptions in the community on aid workers. And sometimes these could impose risk on a person being an aid worker. And that's something we were struggling with in Yemen when it comes to limiting our movement and our interaction because of that.
What you're saying also touches upon some of the bigger themes that the humanitarian sector is grappling with globally, right? Around the legitimacy of its work and also questions of protecting aid workers in environments that are increasingly hostile and increasingly dangerous as international humanitarian law and other norms are eroded or come under threat. And I think Yemen is one of the classic examples of how some of these challenges have been tested and how the humanitarian organizations that we've previously worked for have had to navigate a lot of uncertainty, problem solve, and still continue to stay and deliver for millions of Yemenis who've been displaced and affected by the war. I'm wondering what this has looked like practically in terms of your interactions with colleagues and many of those who are from Yemen who continue to be part of the humanitarian community.
What I loved being in the aid sector in Yemen, not the only, is one of the sectors where you find Yemenis from different parts of Yemen working in one office in one city. So you've in Aden, where I was, we had colleagues from different parts of Yemen, from Sana'a, from parts of in different control areas. And that was great because you get to learn more about these different parts and the experience in these parts, and you allow people to interact with each other. So I hope that in other sectors you can find this, but in the aid sector, at least that was really a very great added value. And when you have in a meeting together. So you have the colleague from Sana'a, from Aden. It's great that they bring the different experience, exchange of ideas and different experiences is really good. It was so interesting for me as an outsider. I'm not a Yemeni, seeing them trying to always point out the differences between themselves. But for me, it's like there are so many similarities. So most of them get out together, get to hang out outside of work together and chuk hot and exchange ideas and brainstorm and send emails. It's amazing how similar they are in their culture, the way they speak. There are a few differences in the accents, but the music they listen to. So it was really great working with in the aid sector in Yemen, because I got to experience people who think that they are very different to each other, but for me they were very similar. So yeah, I think it was a really good thing. Yemen is a very diverse country. It's not that diversity is about location and the culture in that part of the country. So in the north, the environment is very different to the south. It's very different to be raised in a mountain area where it gets cold, where you don't have an AC at home because it gets cold, where you eat certain kind of food compared to being in the south in Aden, where it's mostly warm most of the year. Some friends told me that they don't even have a full sleeve shirt because it never gets that cold. It's super dry, and the food is mainly seafood and spicy food because of the Indian influence in the region. So the diversity doesn't come only from the environment, but also from the Yemen location itself, hosting people from different parts of the world. So you have, as I said, Indians in the South, third generation Indians who impacted the culture in the South. So you find the rotis and you find the Indian ice cream and you find the spicy food, and it's really amazing. And then you have the Somalis and the Ethiopian. It's easy to find Ethiopian food in Yemen, and I love this in the South, but probably not the same in different parts of the country. So for me, it was really interesting that when you are in Yemen, it took me a while to try to figure out that there is diversity in there. It's not, yes, there is very little travel to Yemen, so you can meet other nationalities, but within Yemen, people from different parts of the world who crossed through Yemen, and some of them stayed and built a life there, and now they are third generation Yemenis.
It's amazing because this is a diversity that's been in the making for centuries, just given the fact that Yemen has been this site of historic and modern trade and communication, and has been really a melting pot, especially along the spice route historically, that today is now literally playing out through the cuisine and through other forms of daily culture.
What is also very nice about Yemen, when I went there, I had an idea of like, I really want to learn the flute. But when I went to Yemen, everybody told me, no, in Yemen you learn oud. Like they play oud here. But it was also very difficult to find someone in the South to teach me, because my friends in the South were saying, if you want to learn oud, you have to go to the North. So when you sit with Yemenis, we do have these majlis, and like we sit together sometimes after work during the weekends, and you play music. It's mainly music from the North, because um, that's what people for now enjoy and watch the most, is that these very famous musicians from the north playing oud, showing khat, and singing. So even if you are in Aden, you get to experience the same music. And the dancing in Yemen is like ballroom dancing, because you have two people facing each other and turning around each other. And for me, it's like, whoa, where does this come from? And there are varieties of this. In different cities, they have different dances. And so when you see people dancing, the Yemenis can differentiate that, oh, this is Hadramoti, this is Ta'zi, or this is this or that. But for me, it's just, wow, I haven't seen people in this region dancing this way. So it's very Yemeni for me. It's like I put it in one category, while maybe they can differentiate the different subcategories of it. So that was really interesting for me, how they dance and the similarities in this. The way they dress as well, the marwas for the men. I actually have a couple marwas because I really like them. I didn't know that they are really high quality, really artistic, and there is a message in the marwas that you wear, the colors that you wear, the jalabiya, or the abaya the females wear, the fabric it's made of. And for me, it really was interesting. I lived a long time in Kurdistan, Iraq, and I really loved Kurdish dresses here. But in Yemen, they use similar fabrics, the colors and slightly similar design, and they also layer it with gold. So I felt a bit familiar with it, but I loved how they put full the flowers in their hair for fragrance. I used to buy these flowers necklaces and put them in my room, and you sleep, you wake up in the morning, they are open and the room smells amazing. So I love that they have this full culture. They all use it not only for a bride to fragrance herself, but they usually use it in the house. So it was, for me, interesting that you share so many similarities. Despite the slight differences in food, there are very big similarities. Despite the slight differences in music, very similar, so many similarities. Dancing, the way you dress, and the accents. So for me, it just felt, it's amazing to see that slight difference and try to understand it a bit more. But I felt that they are very similar in a way I haven't seen. Like, I grew up in Iraq, and there are big differences between people in the south and the north, major differences, even language wise. You don't find this in Yemen. There are slight differences, and they are very nice differences, like very great to observe and try to understand. But I really loved the similarities, and I really hope for Yemenis they center that in their interaction with each other.
It's hard often in the middle of a conflict to center that, right? Just because there's so much difficulty at times in exchanging between the North and the South because of the access issues that you described, the challenges in getting across the country because of road closures and hostilities and other factors. But I think also because in conflicts like this, there can be such an othering narrative about the other side that keeps a lot of these similarities from being seen and certainly appreciated when the root of the conflict is one of difference. And it reminds me of some of the other places where we've worked where this is equally a challenge. And I think also what's so powerful in what you're describing is that life continues despite the war. And it reminds me a lot of when I lived in Gaza, and I lived in a building that was every day at the site of some sort of live band that was celebrating a wedding. And it was a daily, visceral, vibrant reminder that life carries on despite conflict, and that people will find ways of finding joy and celebrating and connecting with one another, whether it's getting married in Gaza or it's dancing ballroom style in Yemen, that we all carry on in our own ways and that we're all humans in doing that together.
And you saying that, I really wanted to do this in the end of the episode, but I think this is a good time to recommend this film. It's a Yemeni film based in Aden called 10 Days to the Before the Wedding, or To the Wedding. I'll share a link to the information of the film in this episode description. But it's exactly that. It's like amidst the war, amidst the economic challenges these two Adeni couples face, them trying to do their wedding in 10 days. It's a very beautiful story, and it shows part of the experience in Yemen, and I really recommend watching this film. But there are other sides to the culture in Yemen that we didn't touch upon until now, which is, I think it's a very big part of the culture in Yemen, which is qat. When I went to Yemen, it just happened on the second day I was there. That was a gathering and people were offering. And I was excited to try. And I was like, okay, it's green, it's organic, shouldn't be harmful. I'm surrounded by safe people, and I want to be respectful for colleagues offering it to me. I always say that it was love from the first stem. I just chewed on it. I was like, oh, okay, I could do another stem. And I'm like, okay, let's see how it's going to impact me. And living with other expats in Yemen, qat has been a subject of debate in many of our conversations. Many didn't like it. Many didn't even try it. And some, or also many, loved it or accepted it. So it was really a factor in our experience in Yemen, and also sometimes in the decision of staying in Yemen. Some aid organization staff has been in Yemen for over 9 years, and qat could be a factor, could be one factor in that. And some, they just never really understood it. For me, I am one of the people who liked it actually, but also mainly I liked it because I managed to, through qat, understand how people continue to stay connected and find ways to share and be with each other, try to distract from themselves from news they are surrounded by. Like every day there is a news that might cause them some discomfort, and then them sitting together, chewing together, discussing, unpacking it helps. One thing with qat, and usually in Yemen, it's done with friends, with family. So you are with people, you're not alone. So as a communal activity, it's something that gives you bursts of energy. So you dance with each other, you do something together. It's even said that qat started to get popularity in Yemen amongst builders. They wake up in the morning, they chew, and they have the energy to go and build. So it gives some energy for people to do something together, and then to work and think through issues. So I actually, through experience in qat, I managed to understand why it is essential in the culture, not only in the culture, but also in the economy and in the supply chain of it. It was so interesting to hear that amidst the conflict with very active front lines, cost supply chains were thriving, that even sometimes they take a break for the shipments to move. Because what is also very unique about qat is that people can be picky with it. So they prefer a certain kind over another. So they would like really to get to chew that part that goes in, for example, in a northern city, and they are in the south. That moves the economy, that people that are making money of this, they want to be making sure that they deliver it. And so it was, for me, very interesting how, despite the conflict, despite the disagreements, the grievances between people, with this conflict, and not only this conflict, the history of Yemen by itself, that people just pose all of these feelings when it comes to qat. And it's like, this is my type. I am going to go to the market. I'm going to get it and sit with my friends and chew and talk. And I think it's so interesting. And I'm sure many of my colleagues who didn't like it, if they were in my place now, they will tell you things that I wouldn't say now, but just out of respect to their experience. Many of my colleagues used to say, but it is disturbing the economy. It is not the best investment of resources. It's not the best thing for people, is that they keep, it's bad to say this, but keep dragging themselves from the reality and taking actions. But yeah, so for many of my colleagues, they also focus on the negative sides of it. And there are very serious negative sides. There are health sides to it, dental, stomach, and I'm not sure what other sides that haven't been discovered or I haven't looked into, but there are side effects to it that are not only economic, but also on a personal level harmful to the person consuming it. And it's even caused domestic violence. That by itself is a very serious thing we do have to also discuss and continue to put attention towards the negative sides of it, because there are many Yemenis who are campaigning against qat, and they have very valid reasons for it.
It sounds like qat is a bit misunderstood, and that we could even have a full dedicated episode to it because it has its own complexities. But also what you're describing is its role in the conflict, and also the ability for it to influence the nature of the conflict at times. And it reminds me a bit about some of the export and transfer of oil in the Syria context, right? Where irrespective of who was in control of the territory at a given time, whether it was ISIS or the government or non-government forces, that export of oil, extraction of oil continued, and that there are certain elements of the political economy that just keep running. And it shows that in the midst of a war, where there's a will, there's a way. And it also shows us that if there's the will to continue with those types of industries, where is there then the will to pursue peace?
Yeah, exactly. This is a very strong message, actually. Yeah, and I hope that's the message that we take from conversations like this. We end up with saying, "Cut. Let's pause at this, but then look at that side." And I really agree with your point. I think it's a very important one to end with. But before ending with this, another advocacy point from the Yemeni side, the time I was spending in Yemen, and these Yemeni activists against qat also had a message to the world that I feel like it would be good also to share with the world, is that qat is thriving because of the demand. And Yemen is also known for its coffee, but the demand is not. They are not really demanded in the same way. So the more there is demand for Yemeni coffee, the more the farmers will lean towards growing coffee beans and finding ways to export it. So, and hopefully the world helps Yemen with the exporting coffee. So I feel like it's really important for us all to start to think of ways to support the Yemeni economy. And one way to do this is supporting Yemeni coffee. And there is a very good Yemeni coffee, I think, in many parts of the world. Unfortunately, not everywhere. So finding ways to bring it to our local coffee shops, recommending a provider to them, finding ways to advocate for them to try to find ways to bring Yemeni coffee, I think is something we could all do and could be of great use to the Yemeni economy and general health of the Yemeni people as well.
It reminds me of there was a couple of years ago a pretty big revival of interest in Yemeni coffee in New York City, and all of a sudden you saw this real proliferation of Yemeni culture kind of conquering the coffee scene in New York, and it's led to, I think, a little bit more of a demand and a bit more of an interest, at least for those of us from the United States.
Yeah, and hopefully more of the rest of the world do this. And I think it was so interesting for me and many of the expats was living with. We understood more about Yemeni coffee from what was happening in New York. The books, the publications, the podcasts, they were thriving, and you see many of them. And while we were experiencing the coffee in Yemen, but we were learning about it through foreigner sources. So it would be really, really good for if the rest of the world also take that approach and try to invest in Yemeni coffee and try to also talk about it in a way that more of us could learn about it, and despite the kind of media we consume.
So, as we reached the end of the episode, there were a couple reflections that really stood out to me from our conversation, Noor. I think the first one is really around how the divisions within Yemen that go back to some of the north-south dynamics historically, the fact that there was a really strong socialist command of the economy in the south that had to be merged with a much more market-driven capitalist approach in the north of the country, really shaped not only the economics of daily life, but also the way in which the political economy has evolved in Yemen since, and certainly has shaped the conflict itself, and how these divisions are felt from everything between how people move about in the country, to linguistic differences, to the ways in which certain goods are transported or exported through different ports. At the same time, I think what's really striking in your experience has been actually how many similarities there are between and across Yemenis, irrespective of where they come from in the country and irrespective of where they find themselves now, and how so often when we're divided by war, we lose sight of some of those similarities, whether they're cultural, traditional, linguistic, or otherwise, and are often supplanted by some of the differences that we see that are more recent or that are reinforced as a result of maybe the deprivation, the economic hardship, and the suffering that comes about as a result of the humanitarian crisis that you've described. And I think a third piece of what you've outlined is as well some of the layers of crisis that Yemen is currently experiencing, the scale of humanitarian need, given that tens of millions of people have been displaced, experiencing extreme food insecurity, of access to basic education and healthcare, but that this is coming in the context of also real mixed migration trends across the Horn of Africa, with movements that are taking place that are much more linked to economic opportunity and challenges around that, but also the layers of trafficking and of transnational organized crime that both fuel the conflict and make crime much more easy to take place in the midst of so much insecurity and uncertainty, politically and otherwise. And I think a last observation in this environment is that Yemen is, of course, dealing with a lot of these challenges on its own, but not in isolation, and that the role of regional powers and international players as well in both contributing or fueling aspects of the conflict, contributing as well from a kind of maritime trade and economic point of view, but also the role that they potentially play in facilitating and enabling peace, right? And I think that's where we might want to end, is really around what are the prospects for Yemen moving forward. And that's something that I think we might be able to reflect on and address in future episodes.
Thanks, Rachel. I think that's a very well-rounded reflection of the situation in Yemen. And as you said, we will be able to explore more in the following episodes.
Right.
So thank you for this reflection, and thank you for everyone who took the time to listen to this episode. There will be some recommendations and resources in the notes for this episode. So we really hope that you take some time to explore these and learn more about Yemen. And we see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for staying on to listen a bit longer. We have a couple stories of Yemenis that Noor has met during her time there that we'd like to share with you.
Start with Nasser. Nasser is a local security manager with an aid organization in Aden. And I met him in Jordan, where he was so outgoing, extremely extrovert, going out, having fun, enjoying life. And then he loves his country. He was like, when you go to Yemen, you will try this, you will do this. It's amazing. So I was so excited and hyped about it. And then we arrived to Aden together. We traveled together. He's like, do you have your hijab? You should wear it now. And then he started to censor himself. And he started to share with me that he has to travel every few months to feel himself, because he loves his country. He loves his friends, but they don't understand him. Sometimes they not accept certain behaviors from his side that he finds normal. Through the first few weeks from meeting him, I was so impressed by how outgoing this person is outside of his country, and how thoughtful he was when he was in Aden, because he understood that the context has changed through the years and it's became a bit more strict, and he has to behave in a certain way to be accepted and to be able to do his job, because for him, he wasn't able to be authentic. I've learned a lot from him, that in a context like this, you might meet Yemenis, but it will take time for them to open up to you and to know the different sides to their character. There are so many sides to their character, like any other person. But because of the limitation of the context, it's very difficult to see these sides to the person. So I wanted to share this story and also talk about my friend Nuha. So Nuha, she's a Yemeni woman from the north, from Sana'a, and she found a job in the aid sector in the south. And she shared with me how challenging it was for her to be accepted in the south. She wasn't very strict with her abayas, and she doesn't cover her face. In the south, most females do that now. And her accent is Sanaawi. She's not southern in the way she speaks, and everybody saw her as a threat, as she's there competing on very limited resources. That was challenging for her. She married to a man from the south, so even inside her house, she was struggling with his family. But she told me within 2 years, she got used to the warm weather. She loves Aden. She loves the community she built, and she was able to find herself in a context that is challenging, but less challenging from where she came through, because she wasn't able to be a creative director in the north. While in the south, she's producing her mini documentaries and films, and she's working on podcasts, and she's super creative and super outgoing. And I loved this about her, that she found her voice in a very challenging context, but for her, compared to where she come from, that context enabled her to do this. That despite the context is very challenging, this female was able to allow herself to express herself, not fully. When she's in Egypt, she's very different. I met her outside the country as well. She's also there are different sides to her. So it was really interesting for me to see how the context impact them, and how much you get to know them. And social media helps a lot to see different sides to a person. And I have them on social media and got to know them better. So it's just a bit interesting for me how the context and the restrictions impacted them. I had also another person I wanted to share his story. He was with the organization I worked with. He's one of the first people I met from the organization, and he told me he used to be a sailor. He used to work in Aden port, and he used to be in the sea, and he missed being in the sea. He's been on the land for a long time now. And he just wishes for the conflict to end and for peace to be realized, so he can go back to do what he studied for, what he's done for years, but he wasn't able to do because of the restriction on the port in Yemen. And The conversation happened when I asked him, does he like what he does? He works in the aid sector in a crisis where the economy is very challenging, but at least it's a good job. He said, no, he missed sailing. He wants to go back to what he used to do. And it was a bit sad to hear that despite what other might think is doing great in a conflict, he didn't want it. He wanted for the conflict to end so he can be a sailor and go back to the sea. These are very simple examples of few Yemenis I met, but how this conflict impacted them and how the context continued to challenge them and them trying to find ways to be authentic, be themselves. And I think you'll find every Yemeni have similar story. And yeah, and you just always hope and wish for them to be able to one day be themselves. I'm sure there are more stories we hopefully also touch upon more in the future. So thanks for staying for these extra few minutes to hear these stories.